It's 3 o'clock. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Gaming in Holland webinar, the Dutch online market opening and beyond. My name is Willem van Oort. And welcome to everybody who's joined the webinar. In large numbers, so I'll give it a few seconds for everybody to have adjusted their sound settings, etc. Welcome. Welcome to the webinar. In today's webinar, we will be looking back at the opening of the regulated Dutch online market, the remote licensing process, and subsequent political developments. In other words, there will be a lot to discuss and a lot to take in. However, before we kick off today's webinar, I would like to thank our strategic partners and sponsors. Without their invaluable support, we will not be able to do this. Thank you very much. As always, our webinars are interactive. If you would like our speakers to answer one or more of your questions, please submit them through the Slido app. It's very simple. At the end of the webinar, there will be time to answer audience questions. If you would like to submit a question or upvote somebody else's question, please scan the QR code that you see on the left of your screen now, or visit slido.com and enter the event code #GIH. That's GIH. Next, select the Q&A tab on the top of the screen to submit your questions. Please scan the QR code and you'll be ready for the Q&A later here. With us, we have 3 expert speakers to help us navigate the wide-ranging issues that we will be discussing today. I would like to introduce, and I'm happy to introduce, Geraldine Huijssoon, Head of the Supervision and Operator Department at the Netherlands Gambling Authority. Franssen, Head of the Gaming and Gambling Practice Group at Kalff, Katz and Franssen, as well as Frank Tolboom, Partner at Kalff, Katz and Franssen. Welcome, Geraldine, Justin and Frank. Thank you very much for being here. I'm sure that we're all very eager to hear your thoughts and insights. Before I start asking questions, I will give Geraldine and Justin the opportunity to briefly introduce the topics that we'll be discussing today, namely licensing and recent developments. Geraldine, welcome again, and over to you.
Thank you, Willem van Oort, by which, of course, I also mean Gaming in Holland, for inviting me to be here today. The Netherlands Gambling Authority, the KSA, strives to be a transparent and a visual authority. So to that end, it's very gratifying to be here. I will quickly move on to the topic of the day. I think you're all very interested. It has been 9 months and a few weeks now since the Remote Betting and Gaming Act came into force. A little bit more than 3 months since the market for legal online gambling in the Netherlands opened up. As you know, we ended in 2021 with 11 licenses that were granted. René Jansen, the chairman of the KSA, has said on several occasions yet that this in no way is the final number. We expect to have a more complete picture somewhere around this summer. At the moment, we have quite a good number of applications that are being processed at the KSA, and I expect to be able to announce several new licenses within the next few weeks. To clarify maybe a possible misunderstanding on this point, this will not be in a single tranche like those granted shortly before the 1st of October. The new license holders will be announced as soon as we have completed their procedures. I find it difficult to say precisely how many online gambling licenses ultimately will be granted. I would not be surprised if that number ended up somewhere between 20 and 30. But please don't hold me on that. And an interesting follow-up question, of course, is whether the Dutch market is large enough to support so many operators. Fair enough, but I think that's an issue for the next phase. And you understand that the KSA is not in charge of that. I've heard there's also a question as to why it takes us 6 months to process a license application. Well, what I can tell you about this is that it does not necessarily have to take half a year. It can be in a shorter period of time, but it can also be longer. Much depends on the quality of the application. For instance, are all documents present? And has the groundwork needed to test the connection of the central exclusion register, CRUX, been done? And the same goes for the data safe an applicant must set up in order to be granted a license. If an application is in perfect order, it's also possible to process it in less than 6 months. You yourself, as an operator, a consultant, a testing body, you all have a key role to play in this. But let me be honest in this regard as well. When we began processing the first applications that came to us, there were quite some difficulties on our side as well. At first, the digital portal in which the applications are received didn't work exactly the way we hoped and expected. And second, we had to find the right way of communication with our applicants. I will come to that point later, this webinar, Willem. There were also hiccups when we launched, as you all know, the central exclusion register, because the verification against the city service number was not set up properly. Although that has nothing to do with the application procedure itself, I still wanted to mention it here because it caused quite some trouble. At this point, let me end this introduction before there are no questions left to ask by the audience. I've got one thing to add, and it's please understand that I cannot answer any specific questions in specific cases. I hope you'll understand. So I'll turn over the mic to Willem.
Thank you, Geraldine. That was really enlightening here from your side. We see you again in a few minutes. But first, let us hear the introduction from Justin. Justin, welcome again to the webinar. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much, Willem. Thanks for the invite. And a warm welcome to all of you listeners and viewers. Willem, you've asked me to give a sort of 3-minute elevator pitch of what has happened since October, since the first licenses came in. And I'll try to do that within the allotted time. Actually, three important subject matters. Geraldine already hinted a little bit on it. First and foremost, we saw 11 licenses only issued in October. If you would ask me half a year ago whether actually only 11 licenses would have been granted, I would probably not have believed you. But it is what it is. And by the way, of those 11 licensed operators, not all of them are live, and there's still one to go. It is very different from what we have typically seen in other markets. For instance, Sweden, I would say the majority of operators would get a license, and after that they would get a very difficult time with the regulator. But and here, if you look, there were, I think, 29 applications initially. By now, or a little bit after the cutoff date of April, it amounted to, I think, 33. But just a third of those applications have been granted so far, which is obviously a very low number. I mean, there are probably many reasons for that. Surely there were some technical issues, as Geraldine just said. But also, I think we have to realize that the barrier to entry is quite high. Our regulator is very, very strict, and so is the legislation as such. And simply the license process has proven not to be a walk in the park, and I'm sure Frank will dive deeper into that. Second point to realize is that the whole market dynamic is very, very different from what we expected. And the reason for that was obviously the letter which was sent by the former Minister of Legal Protection, Sander Dekker, on the 20th of September 21, where sort of the industry was expecting that we would have a smooth transition from an unregulated market to a regulated market with the flick of a switch, if you will. And that certainly didn't happen because the minister basically, well, demanded for those operators who are passively available in the cooling off period and so forth to leave the market. And so did most operators who have an ambition to apply for a license. And that, of course, led to an enormous influx of players to the handful of operators who did manage to get a license. So the starting position of the market is very different. The third element I would like to touch upon briefly is the, let's say, well, political issues and also public outcry over the level of advertising since market opening, most notably TV advertising, which certainly led to some backlash and may also impact the market dynamic going forward. And I will speak about that separately in a minute. And surely we also saw the ROC, the self-regulatory code, which was produced by the sector, maybe a little bit late in the date. But I think those are the three most important developments since October, Willem.
Yeah, that's a very nice introduction and summary. I'm sure we touch upon some of these points later on. Let's get into more details, staying with Justin here. I think most of us are aware that the Dutch lower house recently adopted a series of motions calling on the government to introduce additional advertising restrictions, notably TV, as you mentioned. Justin, what are your thoughts on the likeliness and potential reach of such future advertising restrictions?
Yes, Willem, I'm going to put that into a little bit more context for those who haven't been following that news. You couldn't have missed it, I think, if you're an avid follower of the Dutch market. But we had an important debate on the 15th of December in Parliament, where basically the majority of lower house was, came with this outcry on the massive amount of TV advertising. And at that point, the minister basically said, well, we can't restrict advertising too much because we're in the phase where, we're building up, we have to channel those players who are not in a regulated environment to the regulated licensed operators. So I'm not at all motivated to actually initiate any kind of harsh restrictions yet. I may do so in the future, but this is not the right moment. Then a day later, on the 16th of December, we had this notorious debate not a debate, but voting on motions. And two motions were particularly important. One was the motion van Nispen. And the motion van Nispen basically called for a complete ban on advertising, I would say untargeted advertising, for high-risk games of chance. So not for every form of gambling, but for high-risk games of chance. Which, when this motion was adopted, it obviously came in as a bombshell for the industry, because the market just barely opened, and then all of a sudden this motion passes. And second, we had the motion Bikker, which asked for a watershed for online advertising, which means that basically you would need to shut off your campaigns online. And yeah, the sort of reactions we've seen is people were shell-shocked. It's like, how can that be? We had a lengthy parliamentary process, and then just a few months after market opening, there's all of a sudden this U-turn, and the first of industry responses were, especially from those who have zero market presence, never had any market presence into the Netherlands. They actually were like, well, hold on, should we now enter this market? The regulation is strict, it's difficult to get a license, and we are going to be confronted with very harsh marketing restrictions. In January, on the 6th of January, the former Minister of Legal Protection, Sander Dekker, responded to those motions. And actually the response was in a way quite good, because he basically said, well, he reiterated what he stated on the 15th of December. Can you still hear me? The video froze up. Yeah, okay, the video
can hear
froze
you
up.
loud
So
and
you
clear.
have a very odd picture of me, I guess. But anyways,
No, it's fine.
basically he responded and he said, well, yes, I share the concern of Lower House that there is a lot of TV advertising, yet I'm not ready at this stage to take any major steps. A certain level of advertising is required to reach the channelization objectives of 80%. And the current restrictions are already in place to protect the young adults and the vulnerable. But we will look into the watershed. We will look into advertising restrictions, and we will come back to you, Parliament, in around April. And the sort of things they will be looking at, Willem, is oh yes, so, something to add here. The broadcasters already proactively sort of came to an agreement with the minister that they would restrict the amount of TV advertising to 1 TV ad per block with a maximum of 30 seconds. That's the first step they took. And then the minister goes on to say, well, if we look at further restrictions, we'll have to look at a few things like what is untargeted advertising? What are the effects on channelization and the contributions to sports and charities? What's the effect on sponsoring? Think about this one. A lot of the current both land-based and online operators have multi-year contracts with soccer clubs and so forth. So how is that going to impact those sponsorship agreements? What are the effects on high-risk land-based gambling? And let alone the legal aspects of this, which I will not dive into today, but think about European law, the freedom to provide services, the freedom of speech, competition law, and so forth. Now on to the next steps, maybe as a final point, Willem. Well, obviously we'll have to await what the minister will come up with, but surely the minister will do a reach out to stakeholders to get their input on this and to see whether or not it is possible to, let's say, to come up with further self-imposed restrictions, I would say, to hopefully pacify Parliament. And then, even if these sort of further restrictions are going to be announced in April by the new minister, then it's still conceivable it's going to take some time before they're actually implemented, especially if the secondary regulation needs to be adapted or amended. And I can't tell you how long that will take, but I would guess about 6 months. So then we're looking at Q3. And I can go on and on about this, but I think this sort of covers your question, Willem.
Absolutely, and we have some more questions coming up later. If I hear you well, lots of uncertainty, but even so, I think this was really clarifying and gives a good perspective for the rest of the webinar. Thank you, Justin. Our next questions are for Geraldine, who is currently responsible for the licensing related matters at the Dutch Gambling Authority. Geraldine, currently the Netherlands Gambling Authority has granted considerably fewer online licenses, as Justin mentioned, as well, than most people expected. We've been told that this is at least partly due to the high demands of the application process. So to get a better sense of what is going wrong, what are some of the most encountered mistakes, omissions, or other difficulties in the submitted license applications, please?
Well, there are various things that we have seen occur, and we have seen occur more than once. And I would like to address here 3 topics. First, and I think it will not surprise you, is the completeness of the application in general sense. So it's very important that we have all the documents. We cannot begin the substantive processing of the application until we have everything that's needed. And in the first round, we allowed applicants to submit part of their paperwork in, let's say, phases, in the sense that not everything had to be submitted all at once. But we no longer allow this by now. And why is that? Because we think it should be sufficiently clear by now what is being asked and how it should be submitted to us. So please read all the information before starting the application procedure at the CASA. And second, I think sloppiness deserves a mention here as well. We have seen, for instance, that there sometimes is, let's say, a discrepancy between policy documents at the one hand and the assessment results at the other. One example of this topic is player registration and the sign-in procedure. The policy that was handed down to us had some serious shortcomings, but yet the assessment results revealed not any non-conformity. So in hindsight, it turned out that the policy hadn't been adjusted to reflect the post-assessment situation. And you might be thinking, well, what is this all about? But our investigation, as you already told us, Willem, and as I heard as well from the former speaker, is quite precise. And operating games of chance is not a trivial matter. And those who wish to obtain a license must really show that they are well organized and of good faith. The third topic I would like to address is the lack of oversight regarding the complete corporate structure and the practices that are within that network. We received applications from operators who were denied a license because it was revealed that a relevant subject in the quite complex network failed to meet the criteria as set out in the Postma motion. In such cases, I think there was no malicious intent, but rather insufficient awareness of all relevant subjects within the network and operating in the network. So I'm obviously aware that there may be a thicket of companies and brands within the concern, but this doesn't exempt you as an applicant, as an operator, from the obligation to include all the information about all the relevant subjects in the network with your application. So these are three topics that really bothered you and us, I think.
That's quite clear, Geraldine. Moving from these 3 points, very practically, how could applicants avoid these mistakes you mentioned, or otherwise facilitate the license application process?
Yeah, well, I think we already covered many answers to this question when addressing the previous question, Willem. Well, avoid the before mentioned mistakes. That's my first lesson, my first advice. And one thing I would like to add is that it's very important to be critical when you are hiring external expertise. There's nothing wrong with bringing in outside help, of course, but you should make sure that the expertise is genuine. We have seen a few examples where this was not the case, and I'm putting it mildly now. I would also like to emphasize that when third parties are hired, the applicant is and remains always responsible. Our business is with the applicant and not with the third parties. Another vital component of the application process is preparing the corresponding technical components, such as for the CRUX, the Central Exclusion Register, and the establishment of the data safe. Applicants should get a timely start on designing and on building these components and carrying out their own internal tests. They are very important. We therefore recommend getting started well before applying for a license. Don't start with these technical issues when you already applied for the license. The KSA has published extensive information as well on the website on all the topics of the application and especially on the technical topics, like CRUX and like the data safe on our website. So please read that information carefully so that you can correctly submit the technical design and required documentation all along with your application. We are still seeing too many cases where applicants send us their applications without the proper preparation. Various applicants have failed to provide correct and, more importantly, complete data mapping, which is vital. It's really vital in order to set up the data safe. We pay close attention to this, as you know, because well, the data safe will be the tool that we use to conduct our supervision. The tests that are done by the KSA and the operator require several weeks of processing time at a minimum. So only you can ensure that it does not take any longer time than it's needed. Thank you.
I think it was very helpful advice here, Geraldine. Thank you. Very practical points here to take away. Again, it went very quick, and this webinar will be available as a recording somehow late. Tomorrow you will receive a post-webinar emailer pointing to the video of this. But again, thank you, Geraldine. So now we've heard from the regulator. Let's look at the licensing process from the other side of the table. Frank, once again, welcome, and thank you for being here. How's life?
Hey, Willem. Thank you for the invitation.
A pleasure. Frank, kicking it off here, based on your clients' experiences, what is your take on the current licensing process? What are the biggest bottlenecks and obstacles?
Yeah, so your question is twofold. Let me start with our client's take. Well, as Justin already mentioned, the licensing process is certainly not a walk in the park. Most of our clients are generally quite amazed and sometimes even shocked by the level of detail which is required under the Dutch regulations. This also includes clients who already have gone through the motions in many other member states, including the US, which is usually perceived as very strict when it comes to due diligence checks. Even those already heavily regulated clients consider the Dutch application process as quite onerous and intrusive. And then in terms of bottlenecks and obstacles, so apart from technical compliance, which Geraldine already mentioned, the safe control database has had many issues. Connection to Crux. There are also clients say, well, some of the regulations are ambiguous. There are issues with certain policies. I will speak about that later. But one thing which stands out is probably the reliability assessment. And that's considered as quite challenging. Geraldine already mentioned in her speech that the so-called network diagram can cause a headache for some of our clients. And we've even seen clients who decided not to apply. And main reason is that the scope of this network drawing is quite broad. And the reason is that the due diligence is not just performed on the applicant entity and its shareholders. It goes way further than that. Applicants will need to disclose information not just on the UBOs, other shareholders, both direct and indirect, but also on the directors, policymakers, co-policymakers, subsidiaries, sister companies. But this is not it. Most far-reaching requirement, and you don't see this too often in other member states, appears, is that the regulator also requires to disclose so-called ancillary entities. So that's the B6 category of the application portal, or related entities also referred to. And those are the entities in which the relevant subjects, the list which I just mentioned, have a 50% stake or more. And all of these relationships have to be provided over the last 8 years, even when those relationships have been terminated. And as such, this goes way further than the typical organizational structure which most of our clients are familiar with. So important to stress is that those related entities do not necessarily form part of the organizational structure of the operator. These can also be entities, so persons and legal entities outside of the group. And that can also be non-gambling related. And this can also create another challenge because an applicant have to disclose all kinds of documents and statements on behalf of also these related entities, sometimes which are outside of the group and even outside of the control of the applicant. And those entities are not always able and willing to share the required paperwork. So the scope of this due diligence checks is quite broad, and we've seen in practice that applicants had to disclose and perform due diligence checks sometimes on hundreds and hundreds of entities. For example, some of our clients have as owner a private equity firm with lots of investments and stakes in many other businesses, and then all of these businesses, if it meets the threshold, also have to be disclosed to our regulator. A few final comments in this regard on this reliability assessment. The network diagram and the network was already mentioned by Geraldine. The applicant must provide a network drawing. It's one document which maps out all of these persons and entities, which I just explained, and this can be quite complicated. Second, documentation, like I mentioned, the applicant must provide all kinds of documentations on these persons and entities, like certificate of good conduct, criminal records, tax, administrative fines, etc., and also translate all of these documents into Dutch. And I think this is also what Geraldine is referring to, that some of our clients not always are aware of the scope and the fact that also translations, for example, of court rulings from other member states have to be translated and uploaded in a portal. And then thirdly, and the final point is the statements on the cool-off. It's also, of course, a very important topic. And I would like to stress that these statements on a cool-off does not only have to be made on behalf of the applicant entity and the brand for which an application is submitted. The cool-off statement have to be provided on all of these entities. It can also be outside of the group. And this can also create another challenge. For example, if, let's say, a cooling off compliant operator has acquired a non-compliant operator just before or pending the application, then this could contaminate the business, and this could also have an impact on the cool-off due to the wide scope of this reliability assessment. So, in summary, obviously clients face many obstacles, but the reliability assessment is for most of our clients at least one of the biggest challenges.
Okay, that's very clear and very useful insights here, Frank. So looking at things from the applicant's perspective, how could, in your view, the licensing process be improved?
Obviously there are many things which, according to our clients, can be improved. But let's focus on two things, conscious of the time. The first one is the provision of guidance and information, and we think this can be improved, although the regulator, KSA, has put out a lot of information in the digital application portal, which is very helpful according to our clients. But most of the guidance and information has been provided on the website, and some of our clients feel that the website is not always easy to navigate, and it's not always easy to find all of the right information on the website. And this can result in a mismatch between the operators and the gambling authorities' expectations in terms of policies. So one of the suggestions would be to make the website more accessible and easy to navigate, also taking into account that all of the information is provided in Dutch, or most of the information is provided in Dutch. It would be useful if the more detailed guidance notes or the Q&As would also be translated into English, I would say. And Yeah, apart from the website, communication is important. We will discuss that later in the webinar as well. Maybe another suggestion from our clients, maybe that there will be other communication channels considered to provide additional guidance, like webinars. We fully appreciate that it's not always practical to invite 60 or 70 operators for a physical meeting and have contact with all of these operators, but it's very easy to set up a webinar like this, in which certain difficult topics can be explained by the regulator, like a lecture. I think they've done it with Krux in the past, but perhaps this can be done with other topics as well. And the second, obviously, a complaint from most of our clients is that the amount of paperwork, and we fully understand and appreciate that applications have to be complete. And most of our clients, do their best also to make the application as complete as possible, but it would save a lot of stress and energy and time if this requirement on certification, the reports would need to be submitted upon application. If that would be lifted, in the view of our clients, it's not absolutely necessary to already provide all of these technical paperwork upon the application. If you also look at other member states, it's also possible to submit it at least before the go live date, and that's also been mentioned in the decree that should be possible. So less paperwork would also be helpful. Just to summarize, these are just a few suggestions, but we understand the gambling authority is constantly working on improvements, and they're doing a great job. So let's hope that the process on pending and new applications will process as soon as possible.
Very clear recommendations, Frank. We'll get back to the communication part a little bit later. And again, so if there's any need for help with webinars, everybody knows where we are. Moving to one of the last questions, at least before we start to the more interactive part. So speaking about the interactive part, if you have questions to Frank, Justin, and Geraldine, please point your camera to the QR code on the right side of the screen and ask your question in Slido. We'll get to that in about 10 minutes. Geraldine, now the first remote licenses have been issued. What can you tell us about the Netherlands Gambling Authority's enforcement priority regarding license operators? What kind of behavior should license operators definitely avoid? So enforcement policies here.
Yeah. Well, if you allow me, Willem, I first would like to say something also about the illegal operators. We have already shared various details of our new enforcement policy with regard to these operators. And that policy has changed now that there is a legal market as well. The fines for operating illegal games of chance are now much more stringent, as are our policies for determining which operators are prioritized for enforcement. So the political objective of the Act is to channel players from illegal operators to legal ones. And to that end, René Jansen has said that there must be a financial incentive to request a license and operate legally rather than illegally. So this also means that the financial penalties for illegal operators must be high enough to hurt. Okay, then regarding the supervision of the licensed operators, well, the most important thing is please practice what you preach. Before granting a license, we have already investigated to the best of our ability whether the KSA is not being shown a reality that's only exists on paper. And now we will learn about the truth of that reality. We want to see, for example, a good addiction prevention policy, not only on paper, but in real world practice as well. Consumer protection and the prevention of gambling addiction are the leading principles of our supervision. Our supervision will be based primarily on data. In addition to the signs and the reports we receive from the market and the consumers, And as you know, the license entails an obligation to periodically report certain data to the CASA. We already talked about the data safe every operator must set up. And I can illustrate maybe supervision with the help of data as follows. Say, for instance, that there are two operators with roughly the same number of gambling behavior and the same number of gamblers. If then shows that one operator is submitting several reports in connection with possible money laundering, and the other is not, well, then we will look closer at this difference and we take action if that's needed. So that's data-driven supervision. So I think that's something about our priorities. And we have to see, of course, because we just started the enforcement period now.
Yeah, thank you, Geraldine. I think that is very helpful information, and thank you for sharing this. Our next question is directed all our speakers together here. So get Frank and Justin, welcome back here. An often heard complaint is that the Netherlands Gambling Authority can somewhat be reluctant in freely communicating with licensed applicants or other market parties. On the other hand, the regulator is right in trying to avoid a scenario in which certain market parties have information advantage over their peers and competitors. With this in mind, and I'm looking at all of you here, and accepting that some restrictions must remain in place, how could the Netherlands Gambling Authority and operators communicate, as Frank already referred to, and Geraldine and Justin as well? I think we would all love to hear your thoughts on this communication topic. Geraldine, can I ask you to kick this off?
Yes, sure, Willem. Well, during the licensing process, of course, we also try to find the right way of communication in our dealings with applicants. The process itself was rigidly structured, as you may have noticed, which perhaps made it seem quite formal at times. Yet an application procedure is, after all, a legal proceeding. And we also needed to guard against becoming a consultancy firm for applicants, because filling in the application is and remains the responsibility of the operator. That being said, we did sometimes use other ways of communication, like a telephone call or an email, regarding minor practical issues, so that things could proceed more quickly. It was, and we have seen that it was very helpful to operators, but we cannot use it always because we have to be strict when we are in a legal proceeding. So, but we know that it helps, and we know that operators are asking for it. So we will do this for the new applications as well when it's possible.
At the other end of the communication line there, Justin, Frank, how would you recommend better communication?
Yeah, I want to stress that, I mean, on the one hand, it was at times, to be honest with you, quite frustrating if we wanted to have answers, but they came at some point. I mean, if all of the questions we would have received, and surely also other lawyers and advisors, then, you know, Geraldine could probably hire 50 more staff to answer all of those questions. So I kind of do understand where the gambling authority is coming from. Yet I want to stress again, I think what Frank was just mentioning, a very structured website with, you know, thematic Q&As would be extremely helpful. And I think it has changed over time, but to do that in English would be incredibly helpful. What we're currently doing is actually, it's not very advanced. We're scraping the website every day, you know, looking for new Q&As, get them translated, and put them in our own portal for the benefit of our clients. But I think that there's a lot to be done on that front. And surely the let's say the communication, Frank was just mentioning the webinar style, information sessions, which actually could work, you know, during the licensing process. on those topics or subject matters which are, apparently complex or complicated or, lead to a lot of issues, just to focus on those. And there you'll have a public forum, which means that there will be no information disadvantage because, basically everyone who is applying or has an interest is able to attend such event. And you could equally do so after you've been granted a license. So, and yes, of course, it would be great to be able to pick up the phone, but we have to be realistic. There's only so many people within the gambling authority, and it would require, I don't know, maybe the double amount of staff to be able to process all of the questions that come in. Maybe over to Frank. Frank, you have any additions?
Yeah, well, maybe in terms of the post application, once all of the licenses have been granted, might be also useful to look at the UK, where you'll see that there are sector meetings are being organized where trade organizations, trade groups, advisors and other stakeholders are being invited by the regulator, also on the basis of thematic workshops, in which then after this workshop also the outcome, so a Q&A is being posted on the website, so anyone can obtain the available information, and that I think that's also considered as very helpful. So that would also might be a very good suggestion going forward.
Great. I see willingness from all parties to look forward into this. We have 211 attendees here today, so some of the information has already landed at some of the participants, and well, hopefully this is a topic that can be followed up by all the parties in the future here. So before we move to, and I'd like to wrap up that question and start with the Q&A part. We are 3:45, running on schedule. Again, a quick reminder to the viewers, if you've missed the beginning, if you point your camera to the QR code on the screen, or go to the Slido app or website and enter the event code GIH, you can either pose a question or upvote somebody else's question. That we then aim to look at here today. And the first one has come in here from: how will license applications be judged after April 1st of this year in case the applicant has previously offered unlicensed online gambling services in the UK? I think that's a very relevant question. Geraldine?
Yes, it is. It's an interesting and relevant question because it's almost the 1st of April. What can I tell you about it? The policy rule, I think it's Article 3.8, states that illegal offering will not be taken into account in a way that it will lead to a denial of the license. And this is only the case as long as illegal offering was within certain, let's say, boundaries, as stated in the same policy rule, the Postma policy rule. And you can think about, for example, not using Dutch language or using a website ending on .nl. Well, that so-called Postma rule is restricted in time, and it will be active for applications that have been done before the 1st of April, next April, 2022. For applications after that time, yes, what will happen is we will fall back on the regular legislation. This means that illegal offering, like other criminal facts, will be taken fully into account in the integrity investigation we're doing. The question if this will always lead to a denial of the license, well, I cannot answer this with a simple yes or no, because it will depend on all the circumstances. We will judge on a case-by-case basis what the consequences of that illegal offering will be. So that's the way we're looking at it now.
Good question, good answer. Anything to add, Frank or Justin?
Yeah, maybe just a few sentences. What we've heard, some clients and contacts say is that, you're done after the 1st of April and there's not a snowball's chance in hell you will ever get a license if you're in the process of cooling off and you would apply after the 1st of April. And I think this is reiterated clearly by Geraldine. But yes, of course, there will be, let's say, a proportionality test applied by the regulator. But don't forget that the base position will be much more complex after the 1st of April. I mean, the leniency which has been applied for those who apply for a license before the cutoff date of the end of March is no longer applied. So you will have, it's sort of an uphill battle, I would say.
Yeah, and I just would like to add that if we zoom in into the circumstances which will be taken into account in this assessment, the remote gambling policy will also mention that the gambling authority will look at when has the offense been committed. Is that an older or more recent one? What's the gravity of the offense? And some of the other factors will play a role. Let's say an operator switched off 8 years ago, and technically speaking, it still violated the Dutch Gambling Act, and this could result in rejection of the license. But taking into account the proportionality test, like just mentioned, we will be surprised if that also would automatically lead to rejection. So it's a case-by-case analysis which have to be made.
Yes.
Well, let's say if you switched off just last week, Willem, and you had Ideal in the Dutch language, all of that until last week or so, then obviously applying after the 1st of April will become very, very complicated. Yeah, that's logical.
And I think we've also heard some rumors that if you would apply after the 1st of April and you would have any offering in the preceding 8 years, then you have to wait for 8 years. But I don't think that that applies, that for 8 years you're out of the market, then you can reapply.
In our integrity investigation, we look back for all the criminal facts for 8 years. So, it will be of our interest to look at the 8 years, but it doesn't mean you have to wait always 8 years before you can apply for a license. That will depend on the circumstances. And it's not only the case with the, maybe to add on this, it's not only the case with the investigation on integrity. In case of any breach, we will always look at all the circumstances. We will also have to do that when we have to do with licensed parties. And we will look at the fact that, for example, in our enforcement, that the fact that it's new legislation. And we will also look at the fact if all the obligations are clear, or do we have to cope with open norms, for example? Are you a first offender, or are you a repeat offender? So and what kind of breach, what kind of damage? So this is all taken into account. That makes it difficult to give an answer in a simple yes or no, but. Yes, we have to be reasonable at that point, on every point.
Geraldine, just a quick question from my end. Would that lead to new policy rules then also, or is that too early to say?
Maybe Justin. We will inform you before the 1st of April about it. So take a good look at our website, and we will inform everybody.
We'll look at your website every single day.
Great. Well, can't miss it then. This was really a clear, clear as possible, but a complete answer from all participants. Thank you. Moving on to the second audience question here. Have any license applications been formally rejected? If so, on what grounds? and are these negative decisions being appealed? Geraldine, I see you nodding. Can you say something about that?
Yes, there have been license applications that we have, well, formally rejected because of the fact they were very incomplete. So we couldn't start with processing the application. And also, well, I gave you the example of the Postema motion, so that has also been the case. Yes, I think there are negative decisions that are being, well, objected. We are all still in the phase of objection and not in the phase of appeal.
Thank you. Anything quick to add, Justin, for the sake of time, Frank?
Yeah, well, we can't speak on individual cases from our clients, I'm afraid.
No.
Difficult to answer this
Okay,
question.
great. So, but nothing general to add. Let's move to the next question here. And after that, one more and we wrap it up. We're almost on the next hour. When in the license application process will applicants be asked to test their control database? Immediately or later? And how long will this take? It's a very specific question, but I guess since it's been relevant, hearing all speakers here today, it would be worth going quickly into any volunteers?
It's a question for Geraldine, I guess.
Again, yes. Well, it depends. It depends on because you have a more theoretical part of the application regarding the data safe and the more testing part. Yeah. And if all the documents are in place, so if the theoretical part is okay, then we can go on to the testing phase. And well, we have seen that, well, there were also applicants who had it all in place, and then we could start, well, quite quickly after the application started. But we have seen more applicants that found it difficult to give all the documents regarding the data safe, and then they had to. Well, they had to go back and they had to put more information on it, and then they come back and then we have to check it again. So that will take some time, and that means, well, that we could only test in the last 2 months, for example. So most of the time it will take 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and we start quite at the end of the application process.
Yeah. Great.
And that can be a bottleneck.
Question. Yeah, no, obviously, yeah. That is quite clear. And thank you for being specific on this, Geraldine. For the sake of time, last quick question. We have 2 more minutes and then we have the hour filled. Last question here. Justin, on the asked advertising ban, do you not think that a formal law is necessary as it restricts constitutional and international treaty freedoms? Quick answer.
I'm so lucky that we only have 2 minutes left, because this this requires a bit more elaborate thinking. Could very well be. I mean, could very well be. And should that be the case, then of course this is going to delay the process tremendously, because then it would probably need to go through both houses of parliament. And as we all know, changing gambling legislation tends to take a little bit long in the Netherlands. But to be honest with you, I haven't really looked into it. I think, Frank, we didn't really dive into that in any greater detail so far yet. But yeah, should that be the case, then of course it's going to take much longer than the 6 months I was speaking of initially.
Yeah. No, that's quite clear. I guess the developments in the next few months will lead to further webinars and other sessions where we hope to collaborate with all of you for further clarification here. For now, I'd like to thank Geraldine, Justin, and Frank for your participation. Very clear answers, preparation time. Thank you very much for your assistance here today. And with this, we're exactly on the hour. I'd like to wrap up the Gaming in Holland webinar. Thank you all for participating. We will send you, all participants will be sent a link to the recording of today's webinar along with a little report. And of course, if you have not subscribed to our newsletter yet, please do so on either gamingin.eu or on the gaminginholland.com website. Thank you for attending, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.